my friends, the marking scheme of a thesis, okay? I'm going to show you behind the curtain, the magic trick, so to speak, okay? Anyone that's ever like, oh, I can't believe I lost marks for that, or why have I lost marks for this, or how do I get more marks in my thesis? This slideshow is for you. This is going to go behind the curtain and let you look at how a supervisor or an examiner views your thesis or essay. So here's some reasons you're going to lose marks, and they're going to range from, let me get the old laser pointer, it's going to range from minor issues to significant shortcomings that affect the overall quality of the work. So here's some common reasons, okay? So lack of clarity in the research question and objective. So if the research question or objectives are unclear or poorly defined, it can affect the overall coherence and focus of the thesis. It's a very important one. Lock down your research question, lock down your objectives, and mention the research question in your conclusion to show that you do understand that you have to come back to it eventually, okay? Inadequate literature review, failing to conduct a comprehensive literature review or not critically evaluating, that's another important one, critically evaluating existing research, and this can result in a loss of marks. Now I'm going to show you how many marks you're going to lose and the different grading schemes later on. A strong literature review is essential for situating the study within the existing literature base and demonstrating a thorough understanding of the field. So a lot of people just have what's known as a descriptive literature review, where it's basically just saying he said, she said, they said, and it's just, there's no engagement with it. There's no attempt to put headings in that, you know, demarcate what's in those paragraphs, and there's no attention to detail. There's nothing like I'd say there's no attempt to link this one and this one, because your literature review should be informed by your research question and your objective. So if you have a literature review where 2 pages of it is just you talking about topics that have no bearing on your research question, then you're going to lose marks for stuff like that. Another thing is a weak methodology. So problems with the research design, sampling methods, data collection procedures, or data analysis techniques can lead to a deduction of marks. A very common one, and you wouldn't think so, where a student decides to talk about quantitative analysis when it's not part of their methodology. By all means, if you're doing the qualitative, you can talk about why one is better than the other, but when you go into too much detail about quantitative, the examiner is kind of saying to himself, do they know the difference between the two, or do they think they have to mention the two? If you're doing a mixed methods, like an unbalanced weighting of them is also another cause for marks being lost. If you spend a lot of time talking about the qualitative and you just give, like, you know, a few jottings to the quantitative aspect of it, that's going to lose you marks, because your examiner is just going to say, well, why didn't you just do quantitative, or why didn't you just do qualitative? They may not see the reasoning for doing the mixed methods. Poor data analysis and interpretation. So that's another one. So if the data analysis is flawed, incomplete, or inadequately explained, it can undermine the credibility of the study's findings. Students may lose marks for deficiency in data analysis and interpretation. So when you put your data down in your results chapter, it should be aligned according to, here's team 1, here's team 2, here's team 3, if you're doing Braun and Clark. Or if you use any sort of data analysis, that the teams or the headings are clearly laid out, and that the data underneath it is clearly laid out, and that it's logical, and that it's not going back and forth. You're not saying team 1 here and then team 2 and then back to team 1 again. And that's going to help you when it comes to your analysis, because if you have everything under team 1 and it's just this particular topic, and then you're discussing team 1 in relation to previous literature, that's much easier to see than if it's under headings that flow. So team 1, team 2, team 3. And if you have a lot of stuff on team 1 and then you get to team 2 and it's like, well, here's just me repeating the facts again from the results chapter, and then you have one sentence that just says, and this can also be found in the literature review. Where in the literature review? And if you do point it out, don't just say this can be found in the study of Johnson. Mention how it's found in the study of Johnson, and is there any differences, subtle or otherwise. So just be careful with that sort of stuff as well. Don't just have one section be amazing and then the next section be poor and then the next section be amazing again. Make sure it's consistent the whole way through. Failing to adequately discuss the implication of the findings, address limitations, and provide insightful conclusions can result in a loss of marks. I would say just when I mention insightful conclusions here, I don't mean Oscar-winning endings to your thesis. I basically mean that when you're writing your conclusion, just keep the research question in mind and just sort of artificially say, this has helped answer the research question by doing the following. And the following could be a thematic analysis, statistical interpretation, or a mixture of the two. So just remember that then. And then obviously the big one is ineffective writing style and presentation. So issues with style, academic writing, table of contents, list of figures, margins, no page numbering, incorrect, incorrect tone. I think, having some bits casual, some bits academic, that's a clear sign to me of plagiarism, because I often assume if a lot of the thesis is very casual and free flowing, and then there's like a paragraph or two that's very like academic, I'm going to assume that the academic stuff has just been copied and pasted from somewhere, because it's not consistent. And people can do that accidentally, but your examiner doesn't care if you do it accidentally. It's just like, if you haven't taken the time to check in on stuff like that, they're not going to give you the time, and they're not going to give you the patience to say, okay, well, maybe they made a mistake here. They're just going to give that a loss of marks. Other reasons are, of course, inconsistent referencing and bibliography. So failure to properly cite sources, mixing sources up, sources not making into the bibliography or reference list at the end, or even stuff like, if you have a quotation mark from an author and you don't give the page number, that's another loss of marks, because it's a fairly simple mistake to make, and it's a fairly simple mistake to correct. And if you don't do it, then they're just going to think you're lazy. Ethical concerns, obviously that's another huge one. Plagiarism, fabrication of data is a huge one as well. People just run out of time and they think, well, I'll just pretend I had some of those interviews, and I'll just pretend this is what they said, because it's quite easy to fabricate it. I mean, you're the only person with the you're supposed to supply transcripts, but transcripts of interviews can be fabricated, So, and you can massage the data subtly to suit your own research question. You can do that anyway. You can do that before you have the interviews by preloading your questions to get predetermined answers, so to speak. So you can do that at the beginning, and there's not any ethical concerns. You just have to be careful with leading questions. So I don't mean leading questions there. I just mean being conscious of what's in your lit review and tailoring the questions that you're going to get the maximum amount of data to help you compare and contrast with that literature you have reviewed. And obviously the formatting guidelines is the big one as well. Handing something up with no table of contents or page numbering. Generally just handing up like a giant mess and hoping for the best is not the best way to do it. And then obviously the big one is missed deadlines and the word count. So handing your thesis the day after, or a month later, or next year, depending on who you are, is obviously going to have you fail the thesis. Word count is it's a funny one sometimes. Okay, I've no final word on it myself, because it changes wildly. I often tell people not to worry about the word count. If your thesis is good enough, and you're 500 words over, and they fail you for that, I would say go to town on the college, because that's a ridiculous. I know it's a requirement to stay within the word count, but if you produce something of merit and they fail you because you're 500 words over, I would go to town on the college, as I just said, because that is a ridiculous thing. That's basically a box ticking exercise, and that's not what academia is. It's not a box ticking exercise. I know that's what it has become in places, but again, if something is really, really good and it's failed because it's 500 words over, or even 1,000 or 2,000 words over the max, that's really shitty, for want of a better word. And I'll say the same as well. If you're 500 words under or 1,000 words under, but the thesis is really good, then you should not fail. If the thesis is awful and they're looking for a reason to fail it, and it's teetering on bare pass or bare fail, and they're like, you know what, there was no effort put into this, and you're 500 words over, privately you fail for various other reasons. Maybe you were just an obnoxious student, or whatever reason. They're going to use word count as as a reason there, and it harpens back to what I say about the box lifting course. If there's loads of reasons for them to fail you, and most of them are just like personal reasons or whatever, or because maybe they know you plagiarized it but they can't prove it, word count comes into play, because they're just going to say, well, you're over the word count here, so good luck to you. So it does come into play in some cases, and I do understand why it can be used there, especially if a student is just insufferable, threatened to sue the college, never turned up to class, never put any effort in, decided to hand in something at the very end that is completely ludicrous, but they can't prove it's been plagiarized. Then they'll bring in the word count thing here, or they bring in missed deadlines or whatever. But for the majority of students, don't be worried too much about word count. If you feel like you've produced something really good, and you're 200, 300, 500 words over the count, I wouldn't worry about that too much. Okay. So look, first of all, let's have a drink of water. Actually, I'm going to put this up on the screen while I fill my cup up with water. It's time for the ASMR water stream. Here we go. This is an example of a marking scheme / rubric / whatever other name you want to call it. And it's essentially, essentially criteria, key facts to be considered, and then you have the different grading things here. So outstanding down to extremely poor. And it's basically a sliding scale from congratulations, you're the best student I've ever had in my life, I'm going to give you my job, all the way down to how did you get into college, and I can't believe you're in my office, get out. So for abstract, as I say here, introduction and lit review, abstract. This will change for each university, and sometimes each department has their own version of this, but generally it's kind of uniform. And I'll leave that up on the screen for a bit and basically just talk around it, but you can see here the differences. Now it's a little bit unformatted because I tried to squish a huge Microsoft Word's Excel table into a PowerPoint presentation, and although I did a reasonable job, there is obviously some parts where it's missing some stuff, or it's squished in a bit too much. I will say as well, as a side note, if anyone who's making these is watching, don't make it so big. It's too big. I mean, it can't be, even when you're trying to fill these in, because you're expected to, as an examiner or whatever, to write in these boxes as well. And you end up writing something that's essentially looks like a totem pole of words and letters. It doesn't fit. So maybe we can dispense with having so many of these, because a lot of them are kind of the same, I mean, unsatisfactory, inadequate, poor. I mean, they're kind of all the same, aren't they? Do we need them all? So yeah, that's my side rant. Whoever's making these, could you please take me and my feelings into account, and maybe shorten it a bit. But there, okay. So hopefully everyone's had a good read of that there. You can see the difference here. So little or no evidence of aims and objectives, no evidence of literature, and then obviously the extreme of that is insightful, very critical and coherent, very clear aims and objectives. You'll see stuff like critical engagement, critical analysis, intertextuality, all those type of terms I have videos on. If you're a sort of a prolific watcher of my videos and a consumer of my content, and you really take it on board and you utilize it, you're going to end up in this section here. Okay, that's not a guarantee, by the way, but I do think if you have watched my videos and you do adhere to the guidelines, it's very hard to go wrong. It's not, they're not looking for a masterpiece or Oscar-winning thesis. They just want to see that you have, here's my research question, here's my objectives, here's a literature review that has been compiled in lieu of that research question, here's my methodology that I'm going to use to fill in the gap I saw in the literature review, and then here's my findings, and then here's my discussion of my findings in relation to the literature I've reviewed, here's my conclusion, and here's how the research question was answered, here's a list of references I used, and here's everything tied up in a nice bow. There's a table of contents, there's a page number, the whole works is there, okay? Here's the marking scheme / rubric for the methodology, okay? So again, more or less the same. if you're in the sort of the high percentile range in regards to your methodology, it means you have well developed, very rigorous methodology. You have a collection of highly pertinent data, exceptionally strong, coherent arguments. Okay, and then the very thing at the bottom is no serious attempt in methodology, no data. I mean, that's the worst one to have here. Is stand up a thesis and say, I did nothing. I'm sorry, I didn't bother my arse to get any data. So yeah, at that point, just don't hand it in. You know, I mean, yeah, I mean that's ridiculous. You know. It's what's the, I forget the term. It's like it's better to keep your mouth shut and not look stupid than to open your mouth and look stupid. I know I'm butchering that term, but it's essentially that. It's like no one will know you did nothing on your thesis or no work if you hand nothing in. You can just leave college and just say, I just didn't have the time. But to hand something in with no data or no methodology is like, I don't know, like maybe you should go up into a frame on a wall somewhere of a cautious warning. But yeah, don't that's my in the 10 years running this business, I've only had to say to a very few people, do not hand this in, because it's better to sort of if you hand something in, you fail it miserably and you put no effort into it, that's not good. And when you go to apply to another college, you're better off kind of saying, or another course down the line, you're better off saying, I just didn't have the time. So I missed the deadline. But if you say, well, I handed up something and it was awful, they're going to look at that and go, kind of say to themselves, maybe we don't want you on the course, or maybe it's not a good use of your time. So just remember, you know, it's better to disappear at the back door than run out the front door, like, you know, nude with nothing to your name. Here's the marking scheme for finance discussion, conclusion, and for formatting. Okay, so as we saw in the other parts, you're going to get the most marks for clear communication, for future research, conclusions that link to aims, objectives, and literature review. And then the presentation is going to be lovely. You're going to have a nice table of contents with page numbers. You're going to have a nice, a nice presentation essentially. You know. Now look at this, okay? Look at the people at the very bottom, okay? No serious attempt on data analysis, interpretation, conclusion. Completely inappropriate presentation. Inappropriate is a sort of that word's doing a lot of heavy lifting, okay? It's what I just said about running nude out the front door, okay? A lot of people hand up a thesis with no front page on it, no table of contents, no page numbering. I'm not here to make fun of those type of people. Those people know what they're engaged in is stand-up comedy. They know, like, there's no sympathy to be garnered for that. Like, there's nothing. Like, so a lot of people say you're being too hard on them. I'm not, because they know themselves that they should not have handed that in. As I said, if it's a week before your thesis and you've done nothing, and you contact me and you're like, I need help, I'm like, you do need it. You need a priest, not a proofreader. And I always say to them, just don't hand anything in, because we have this thing in Ireland where it's like, and I don't know if it's just bred into us or bred into us from the Leaving Cert, where it's like, just put anything down. Don't do that. That's awful. Like, do not just put anything down. Keep the illusion going. Like, you're better to be like, that student just disappeared one day, just never came back. It's better to be that than the student who decides to be in this category for whatever reason, okay? Someone, if you have a good group of friends, or you're somewhat friendly with a lecturer somewhere, they'll give you the same advice I'm giving you, which is basically like, the back door is that way. You know, I'll open it for you and I'll close it behind you. Because if you hand in something that that makes a mockery of the academic system, that makes a mockery of the college, and more importantly, it makes a mockery of you, you're better off just not doing it, okay? There's loads of different reasons why people don't finish their thesis, and loads of genuine, 100% genuine reasons why people don't finish it. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about someone who decided, I'm not going to do anything all year, and I'm going to do it all at the end. And then when the end came, when they got to the can, they've been, booting down the road for the past year. They're like, I'm going to try and kick the can even more. This is your welcome to the column you're going to live in, okay? So yeah, just don't do any of that. Most people end up in this section here, okay? So if you put in the minimum amount of work, you can expect to just come into this section here. This section here, the excellent, very good, and outstanding section. These are students who have used my service. No, only messing. These are basically people who I don't know. It really depends. Like, this depends on having a really good supervisor who basically says, here's the research question we're going to use, here's the methodology, and generally these are just very simple types of thesis. Okay. Because the more simpler you keep your thesis, the less likely you are to careen off the side road and take shortcuts and have something that's unbalanced. So if you're doing a mixed methods, generally it's very easy to have an unbalanced methodology, or it's very often the case, or sorry, very often it's the case that you will just have no real justification for having a mixed methods other than just saying, well, I'm going to do quantitative and qualitative. Yeah, but why? Is one informing the other? Did you do a survey and did you say, do you know what, I want more in-depth data, so I'm going to interview some of the people from the survey? That's perfectly fine, but just make sure you have a justification. And if you don't, you'll probably end up in this section here, or even down here if the rest of it isn't up to par. But the simpler you keep your thesis, the more likely you're going to end up in this section here. Now, this section here, I'm going to throw in a few things. So if you're a curious student or a new academic, we love our new academics. I'm an old academic. I've been surpassed. I've been replaced by newer models. Okay, so look, you want to know more about the marking schemes I'm yabbering on here about. Okay, here's some books and articles on marking schemes that I've collected. Okay, these are going to help you. Especially if you're, as I said, like you want to be a very curious student to give up your time to be reading these. But for anyone that's starting off in academia that wants to know more about what I'm on about, or why different columns are there and why others aren't, these things are great. You can have a look at these books and articles and I'll steer you right. For the more technically minded people, we have some online rubric design tools. And I got these off a website, which I'll provide in the description, and it basically just collects types of rubrics, type of design tools you can use, and you can reorganize them, reconfigure them to your heart's content to use in your own classroom. So yeah, that's basically the marking scheme of a thesis. As we saw, there's various different methods you can use to get the most marks out of a thesis. I would say just be very, very careful with just knowing that, as I said at the beginning of that video, I had the most common mistakes. If you can take care of most of them, you should be fine. But I think the big one is just keep in contact with your supervisor, keep up to date on what the actual marking scheme is. You don't want to spend all your time having a beautiful looking thesis and then the rest of it not being great, because the marking scheme and the changes from different colleges, but generally the least amount of marks will go for formatting and presentation. The majority of the marks are obviously going to go for the main content of the thesis. So just be conscious of that. But don't let any don't be deficient in any part of it just because it has less marks. But if you are stuck for time, don't spend all your time like doing your table of contents when you could spend that time doing your discussion chapter or making sure your literature review is being critically evaluated. Okay.